I'm sure that you have lots to say about what you read for today. I just want to remind you to complete the vocab quiz by midnight Sunday. And we're going to be doing Goblin Market on Monday, which is going to incorporate a lot of the themes. I know you've done Goblin Market with me before anyway, but this is going to incorporate a lot of the themes that we're talking about today.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
All right. So what do you think?
I mean, obviously I liked it. I thought it was interesting. Anything that has to do with any kinds of feminism, I really like. I really like the anonymous one though.
Okay.
The Great Social Evil. I'm curious because reading like the introduction thing to it, that like it was like someone had sent it prior, and then this person was just kind of like, okay, well this is also my experience with this. And I read that like obviously like they don't know if it was credible coming from like an actual prostitute or anything like that, but
we have no idea who this letter came from, or who the letter she was responding to came from.
Right.
But I think one thing that's I think important about the two letters is that what they really kind of hinge on is class difference.
Yeah. And then also kind of calling out, like, how are you going to punish us for doing wrong when we were never taught that it was wrong?
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing, which has to do with class difference.
Yeah.
There's two completely different worlds.
Yeah, and it's funny today. Like whoever wrote this letter is clearly like intelligent and eloquent.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
One of the reasons a lot of people couldn't believe it actually came from a genuine prostitute was that the language was too polished.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was reading it, but that wasn't what I was thinking.
Yeah, but she
I was like, damn, good for
yeah.
her. She's very well spoken.
Yeah, well, and in fact, like if she's if as she says she's working as a kind of like a high class courtesan, she would have to be intelligent and eloquent and able to carry on conversations with people who were her social superiors.
Right.
Which I think is one of the points that she makes. Like she receives an education of sorts, but the education that she receives really is in seduction and in getting wealthy men to part with their money. I think like this whole idea of class difference is at the base of most Victorian kind of gender ideology, right? Bless you.
Thank you.
So one thing I don't know if we've noted so far about the Victorian period generally is that like post-industrial revolution, the aristocracy goes into a kind of decline in terms of wealth and influence. And it's really the middle classes that become socially and economically dominant in Britain, even if they're not politically dominant right away. Right? In fact, that continues to be a problem that in Parliament for many years, the south of England, which was more rural and in many cases more aristocratic, had more representation than the industrialized north, which was where most of the economic activity was happening. But as the middle class becomes dominant, their values are the values that everyone else is kind of trying to ape, right? And the big watchword in middle class values in the Victorian period is respectability. So what do you think this means? What do you think it means to be respectable?
I think if we're speaking in the context of during the Victorian period,
and we should be,
I would say that, I mean, it depends, I guess, if you're talking about women being respectable, like just kind of being like the woman for the house, being there, like in the first, I think it was the women question debate, there was something that really annoyed me. Or it was the other one.
Was it in the Sarah Stickney Ellis?
It was
piece?
probably
Okay.
an Ellis piece,
Yeah.
yeah. I'll find it real quick, because it's probably underlined. Yeah. I still cling fondly to the hope that some system of female instruction will be discovered by which young women of England may be sent from school to the homes of their parents, habituated to be on the watch for every opportunity of doing good to others, making it the first and the last inquiry of every day. And then at the last sentence, I hope to pursue the plan to which I have been accustomed of seeking my own happiness only in the happiness of others.
Okay, yeah.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
That the woman writing this feels like that is her duty. I mean, I'm sure she was like conditioned to believe that that is what she's supposed to be doing and thinks that. So I think that in a sense, like that's probably like what a woman feels like she needs to be respectable.
And what does any of this sound familiar? Does that sound like anything you've read before?
Yeah, definitely. Mary. No, I wouldn't say Mary Wollstonecraft. Dorothy Wordsworth, probably, definitely.
Yeah. Remember that idea of vocational philanthropy? Yeah, this idea that women, particularly middle-class women, are called to, to serve out of love, right? And the idea that Stickney Ellis is promoting here of what she calls disinterested kindness is basically the same thing, right? Updated for another generation. I mean, she's only about a generation or two younger than Dorothy Wordsworth, right? This is published in 1839, so very early in the Victorian period. In fact, Dorothy Wordsworth is still alive when this is published. But yeah, this idea of disinterested kindness, right? That you should live to be kind to others with no expectation of reward, right? That's what she means here by disinterested, right? You do what is good without any thought for how it impacts you. Whether it inconveniences you or, whether you get any kind of reward for it or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So what this is an excerpt from is a kind of educational text that was often given to young women called a conduct manual.
Oh my God.
And these conduct manuals, were essentially like instructions for middle-class women on how to be good wives and mothers, how to conduct themselves in the home, in the family, and in society, right? So some of it is practical stuff on basic housekeeping and, cookery, things of that nature. Although, would a middle-class woman in 1839 typically be doing her own house cleaning or her own cooking?
Middle class?
Middle class. So remember what middle class means in a European context, right? Yeah. No, right?
Yeah.
There would be servants.
Which comes in the boredom thing.
Yeah. Basically, they're expected to sit at home with nothing to do.
I know, and that was another argument that I liked, that she was like, what the fuck? Men would not want to sit around and twiddle their thumbs all day, like, that's not satisfying enough.
Yeah.
And all of this is crazy.
Yeah. There's this idea, right, that men and women occupy different social spheres, right, or ought to. And this is actually something that's adapted out of ancient Greek and Roman culture, right? So among the Greeks, right, you had this concept that was called the oikos, right? And the oikos was the kind of the perfectly divided household of gendered spaces. The exterior spaces, anything that faced outward, was the man's space. because he was the one who was supposed to be out in the world doing things. The interior space belonged to the women and children, right? The private space. So there's this public-private divide where, men do the family's public business and women take care of all the family's private business. So while they wouldn't be housekeeping in the sense we think of it like, dusting and cooking and changing diapers and shit like that, they would typically be managing the household servants, right? Servants. That would be the wife's role in the family. But yeah, so the basic idea is that, the man operates in the world, and that he is intellectually superior, which is why he goes out and operates in the world. And just to give you some notion of just how what a bullshit basis this was built on, right? The fact that men's brains are a few ounces heavier.
I know, I read that, and I was like, holy shit.
So because we have slightly larger heads than women on average, we're supposed to be smarter.
That's so ironic too, like.
Yeah.
They do have big heads.
Yeah, in fact, on average, women tend to have higher average IQs, although men are more likely to be clustered at either extreme.
Yeah.
So they're supposed to be intellectually superior, but morally inferior to women. Right?
Yeah.
More easily led astray by the things of the world and by their own cleverness, right? Whereas woman is supposed to be the keeper of the home and hearth, and while she is regarded as intellectually inferior to her husband, she is his moral superior. Now, what we have here is a kind of system that puts women in a kind of box by praising them, right?
Yeah.
So by suggesting that they're morally superior, right, this means that they still end up in a subservient position to men, right? Because they have to provide a good moral example.
Yeah.
And they have to provide that kind of moral compass for their wayward husbands.
Yeah, and then
who
it's
would
also
otherwise just go out and work with
excusing,
prostitutes.
like,
Yeah.
oh, well, men were just inherently morally inferior, so
Yeah.
sorry, I just slept with
Yeah.
3 women. Like, it's just
Yeah.
excusing the bad behavior and
Yeah, I mean,
giving it reason to just, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you're the morally superior one, not me.
Rates of syphilis in the Victorian middle classes were astonishingly high.
I can imagine.
And I think a lot of it has to do with this whole idea of respectability, right, which we haven't really quite got around to defining yet. But maybe if we think, like, have you ever read The Hobbit?
I think I read the first Lord of the Rings. I've never
Okay.
read The Hobbit, but I have
Okay.
seen the movies.
Okay.
I'm very familiar with Lord of the Rings
Okay,
and The Hobbit.
I'm not sure if the movie is going to help you with this.
Yeah,
right?
no,
But like,
probably not. Let's see.
like at the very beginning, like Bilbo Baggins is a good and respectable hobbit, right? And what makes him respectable is that he never does anything unexpected, and he never goes off and has adventures of any kind, right? And this is kind of like actually kind of like built on that Victorian model of respectability, where what respectability really is the appearance of moral seriousness. So you're respectable because, you know, you act like a morally upright grown-up, right? You don't do childish things like go off and have adventures, right? You put on a suit and you go to work and you do your job and you come home to the bosom of your loving family Or if you were a woman, you stay home all day, and you manage the servants, and you maybe have guests into tea now and again and so forth, right?
Yeah.
But you don't give the neighbors any cause to talk about you.
Yeah, that's what the anonymous lady, she was talking about. She was like,
Mm-hmm.
I earn my money and pay my way and try to do good with it according to my ideas of good. I do not get drunk nor fight nor create uproar in the streets.
Yeah.
Or out of them. I do not use bad language. I do not offend the public eye by open indecencies. I go to the opera, I go to all nights, I go to theaters, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But like, that's like, I mean, like, obviously, I feel like in that terms, like, she is a respectable person.
Yeah.
I think that's, people are saying it's respectable about her is the fact that she's doing her own thing to make some money.
Exactly. Her profession excludes her from the circle of the respectable, right?
Even though her appearance of moral seriousness is just as equivalent to everyone else's in that time.
Yeah, if you don't know what she does for a living, at least according to her own description of herself and her activities, then you have no idea that she's any different from any other middle-class woman, attending the opera or social events, right? Yeah. But yeah, I think like one thing that we really need to make a lot out of is that respectability is about appearance rather than actuality, right? So respectability is to actual morality as sincerity is to honesty, right? Now, someone who is sincere might also be honest, right? But you can still be sincere without genuinely being honest, right? Sincerity is about making people believe you, right? Appearing to be trustworthy and honest. Respectability is basically the same kind of thing, right? So, men, as long as they were discreet, were able to get away with an awful lot of shit.
Yeah.
Women had fewer opportunities to do this sort of thing. And if they were caught in an impropriety, tended to be tossed unceremoniously from the circle of their peers, right? So the idea of middle-class womanhood kind of falls along two poles. And I say idea because the sense to which either of these exist in reality is debatable, right? To some extent, like, these might just be kind of literary constructs. But on the one side, you have the so-called angel in the house. Right, named for this incredibly bad poem by Coventry Patmore that we have an excerpt from here on page 659, right? And Patmore is writing this poem in praise of his wife, and it becomes incredibly popular. And like, people don't read this much anymore because it's not a very good poem.
Yeah.
And the sentiments are, to put it mildly, old-fashioned, right? It's not a poem that really kind of suits a post-feminist historical moment very well. Largely because of the kinds of qualities for which it praises the wife, right? So let's just kind of like go through this quickly. So page 659 here, the paragon. Right. When I behold the skies aloft, passing the pageantry of dreams, the cloud whose bosom signet soft, a couch for nuptial Juno seems. The ocean broad, the mountains bright, the shadowy vales with feeding herds, I from my lyre the music smite, nor want for justly matching words. All forces of the sea and air, all interests of hill and plain, I so can sing in seasons fair, that who hath felt may feel again. Elated oft by such free songs, I think with utterance free to raise that hymn for which the whole world longs, a worthy hymn in woman's praise. a hymn bright-noted like a bird's, arousing these songs' sleepy times, with rhapsodies of perfect words, ruled by returning kiss of rhymes. But when I look on her in hope, to tell with joy what I admire, my thoughts lie cramped in narrow scope, or in the feeble birth expire. No mystery of well-woven speech, no simplest phrase of tenderest fall, no like in excellence can reach her, the most excellent of all. The best half of creation's best, its heart to feel, its eye to see, the crown and complex of the rest, its aim and its epitome. Nay, might I utter my conceit, 'twere after all a vulgar song, for she's so simply, subtly sweet, my deepest rapture does her wrong. Yet is it now my chosen task to sing her worth as maid and wife, no happier post than this I ask, to live her laureate all my life. On wings of love uplifted free, and by her gentleness made great, I'll teach how noble man should be to match with such a lovely mate. And then in her may move the more the woman's wish to be desired, by praise increased till both shall soar, with blissful emulations fired. And as geranium, pink or rose, is thrice itself through power of art, so may my happy skill disclose new fairness even in her fair heart. Until that churl shall nowhere be who bends not awed before the throne of her affecting majesty, so meek, so far unlike our own. Until, for who may hope too much, for who wields the powers of love, our lifted lives at last shall touch that happy goal to which they move, until we find as darkness rolls away and evil mists dissolve, the nuptial contrasts are the poles on which the heavenly spheres revolve. So there are a couple of assumptions baked into this poem that are typical of the era, right? So what do you get out of this?
I feel like during this time, I feel like it's almost like they're like, it's a very manipulative relationship between male and female.
Uh-huh.
Like, they're just praising them for like what they're doing right so that they don't do anything wrong. I feel like they keep making, I feel like in everything, like men keep emphasizing like their morals and like how they're just like these sweet little like, oh gosh, I don't like these like sweet little things of just delicacy. Which I mean like, yeah, duh, but like the fact that it seems extremely manipulative. Like, I mean, and it's easy now, like obviously for like us to see right through that, like it's super transparent, but during that time, I feel like these women, like, I mean, with no other purpose in life, like they're honestly
and practically no education.
That is like their life goal is to be like that strongly desired by a male. One of them even said it, I don't know where when all of this it was, but she mentioned how like, I think it was the first one, talking about how like women want to be desired by man. And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, but like that shouldn't be the sole purpose of their existence.
Right.
But I think that in this time, like that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Because they had no other choice. It had to be like if they weren't desired by man, then their life was going to be shit.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna throw a term up on the board here. Let me know if this is a term you're familiar with. Do you know what ideology is?
I should know what ideology is. Go ahead.
Okay, so ideology is a term that comes out of Marxist philosophy. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with, I'm not trying to turn you into a communist or anything, right?
Okay.
So, don't flip out. Sometimes people do. But yeah, so ideology is essentially kind of like the underlying set of unquestioned values in a culture, right? Usually what these are the values of whatever social class is dominant, because they usually control most of the means of actually like getting your ideas out, right? So this gender ideology, right? This is something that is just kind of generally assumed by most people to be true and normal, right? It's this kind of this massive shared belief across most of the culture. And yeah, and I think you can see what, like, Coventry Patmore is stirring the Kool-Aid, right? And, Sarah Stickney Ellis was clearly drinking it, although Ellis is writing about 15 years before Patmore. But for both of them, right? These are the ideas that they're steeped in, right? This is something they've grown up in.
Yeah.
And when you've grown up with this just kind of assumption that this is reality, right? That this is truth, it's really hard to see out of that.
Yeah. I feel like, has to be like the biggest reason why like old people are still racist and
Yeah.
homophobic. And
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's not just old people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like it kind of takes a massive shift in cultural attitudes for ideology really to change much.
Definitely.
And yeah, when you point out to people, I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like academics. Is that we're kind of trained to look for this shit. So a lot of people really get angry with you if you point out to them that everything they believe is based on, false assumptions or a lie, right?
Yeah.
People tend to resent that.
Yeah, they do.
And so this is the thing, is like ideology, like it doesn't deal with things that are necessarily lies, but things that are not objectively true, right?
Yeah.
They become true because this is what everybody believes.
And people are just conditioned to accept
Yeah,
the
and
trajectory of their existence.
Yeah, and to give you an example of like how this kind of disseminates, right? And what this has to do with ruling class ideals. So I'm going to show you a portrait of the royal family. This is by a German painter by the name of Franz Winterhalter, which is really fun to say. And yeah, this is the royal family in 1846. So here we have our Queen Vicky, her husband Prince Albert, their eldest son, their daughters, and the baby, who I believe the baby was also a boy. But yeah, they have a whole brood of kids, right?
They do.
In fact, because Queen Victoria had so many children and was a genetic hemophilia carrier, right? The gene doesn't usually express itself in women, but does express itself in men. This is believed to be actually one of the reasons why several of the royal families of Europe ended up dying out. They married into Queen Victoria's family and produced sons who didn't survive. So that's a little depressing, yes. But it's just kind of interesting historical side note
It's
there.
a really good painting.
Yeah. And I think what I want to look at here is just kind of like the way it's composed, right?
Uh-huh.
The way the members of the royal family are positioned here, right? Who would you say is at the center of this painting?
I would say the husband.
And what? Okay,
Maybe
what?
not.
Why?
I don't know, he's the biggest.
He's the tallest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, his head comes up
And
higher.
the angle is
your
kind
eye-
of coming from like putting him like front and center. And
Yeah.
he's also wearing black. Everyone else is wearing, besides the little boy.
Yeah, he's the only one wearing black. And his posture is upright and rigid and serious, right?
But I mean, my eyes immediately go to her. But I
Uh-huh.
don't know if that's just like biased or like
Well,
I'm just like, look at her, she's
Mhm.
pretty.
Although also she's looking at us, right?
Yeah.
No one else in the painting is looking at us.
And the red, like, with the white, like her son's
Mhm.
outfit right there is very much like.
Yeah. And which of the two is actually interacting with the children?
Her. Of course.
Yeah.
And then the
And the little-
oldest daughter is with the baby.
The little girls are taking care of the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, even the little toddler here is she's kind of hobbling over to go to the baby, right? The little girls are all drawn to the baby. And yeah, and like we have our gentle but stern paterfamilias, right, looking over everything.
Yeah.
Now, who actually ranks higher? Queen Victoria or Prince Albert?
Queen Victoria.
Yeah, she's the fucking queen, right? And yet, the picture gives us the impression that he's in charge and this all kind of revolves around him, right? She's managing it, she's actually touching one of the children. But, you know, he is the sun around which their solar system revolves, right? And you know, these paintings, these images of the royal family serve that very powerful ideological purpose, right? Of presenting to the nation, right, a model for what the family should look like.
All the kids, like a lot of kids.
Yeah.
I feel like that was always encouraged until it wasn't, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well, let's be honest too. Like in the 19th century, you know, birth control was unreliable at best.
Yeah.
And infant mortality rates were high. Plus, you know, if you say were an agricultural laborer who worked on a farm, or if you were, you know, you worked on a farm, right? Then you wanted to have a big family to work the farm.
Right.
You know, meanwhile, if you were, say, an urban industrial laborer, you know, in the era when child labor was, you know, not just, you know, legal, but basically normal among the working classes, right? More kids means more hands, means more dollars of income, right? So, even though it also does mean more mouths to feed. But yeah, so the middle classes in particular are trying to imitate what they see in the royal family. And then the working classes often try to emulate what they see the middle class doing, right? So for example, like one of the reasons why the working classes often develop fairly conservative gender ideologies is the idea, for example, that if you are making enough money that you can afford for your wife not to work, it shows that you are prosperous. It shows that you're doing well, right? If your wife and your kids don't have to go out and work. So there's a kind of divide that develops between how the working classes view gender and how like middle class feminists eventually will, right? So let's get back to this whole angel in the house idea though, right? So it's fair to say that Coventry Patmore is putting his wife on something like a pedestal, right? What's the danger for someone of being on a pedestal?
They have expectations too.
Yeah, and pretty tight expectations, right? If you step too far forward, too far back, too far right, or too far left, you're going to fall off that pedestal, right? So the angel in the house idea really is a kind of respectability trap, right? If you are the angel in the house, you are supposed to be a self-sacrificing moral guide for your husband. And an angel in the house who commits any kind of sexual impropriety is immediately transformed into her opposite number, the so-called fallen woman. And the fallen woman is basically shunned by her respectable former peers, right?
Yeah.
That's the social attitude you're supposed to take towards someone who has, who like no longer meets the ideal. And indeed, like there are these whole societies that pop up in the Victorian period that are devoted to what they see, like to the suppression of vice among the working classes, right? You know, the idea to make people more morally upright, more respectable, right? And these tend to be middle class organizations. The big one is called the Society for the Suppression of Vice. In fact, I think the author of The Great Social Evil specifically mentions this organization. It's founded in 1802, and it's active really kind of over almost the entire course of the century, right? So it's active until 1885. And this particular group of middle-class busybodies was worried in particular about obscene or blasphemous publications right? So stopping people from printing naughty words or atheistic or heretical beliefs. In fact, public expressions of atheism were one of their major worries. They liked to picket businesses that were open on Sundays. They wanted to close down pubs and casinos, places where people drank or gambled. And they were exceedingly concerned with prostitution and believed prostitution to be a moral problem, which I think is where our anonymous writer kind of takes issue with them, right? Because for her it's less a moral problem and more of an economic problem. So the typical kind of literary or artistic narrative of prostitution in the Victorian period follows this fallen woman arc, right? A middle-class woman, is caught having an affair or has a baby out of wedlock or kind of does something that marks her as less than respectable in the eyes of her peers. And her only recourse is then a life of prostitution.
Right.
As our anonymous writer here notes, this isn't where any prostitutes she knows actually come from. Right? The one more unfortunate author claims to have been a governess who was seduced by her employer. Anonymous here says, now bullshit. This is where the bulk of Britain's prostitutes are coming from, the working classes and slum neighborhoods. Right? She says, "Sir, another unfortunate but of a class entirely different from the one who has already instructed the public in your columns, presumes to address you. I am a stranger to all the fine sentiments which linger in the bosom of your correspondent. I have none of those youthful recollections which, contrasting her early days with her present life, aggravate the misery of the latter. My parents did not give me any education. They did not instill into my mind virtuous precepts, nor set me any good example. All my experiences in early life were gleaned among associates who knew nothing of the laws of God but by dim tradition and faint report, and whose chiefest triumphs of wisdom consisted in picking their way through the paths of destitution in which they were cast by cunning evasion or in open defiance of the laws of man." Let me tell you something of my parents. My father's most profitable occupation was brickmaking. When not employed at this, he did anything he could get to do. My mother worked with him in the brick field, and so did I, and a progeny of brothers and sisters. For somehow or other, although my parents occupied a very unimportant space in the world, it pleased God to make them fruitful. We all slept in the same room. There were few privacies, few family secrets in our house. So let's try to unpack her description here of her family situation, right? What do we note about it?
They were definitely not middle class.
Yeah.
She does say that there are few family secrets in our house, so like,
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing that
Yeah,
they
they all-
didn't know.
They all live in one room, right?
Yeah.
And mom and dad have a big brood of kids, right?
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we grasp it, right?
Uh-huh.
That she is fully aware of how babies are made
Yes.
from a very, very early age, right? Because there's no place private for her parents to go.
Yeah.
And who in the family works at brickmaking or whatever else they can?
Her
Yeah.
dad and her mom.
And
Them.
yeah, everybody, right? Everybody has to work just to afford this one room that they live in, right? I was a very pretty child and had a sweet voice. Of course I used to sing. Most London boys and girls in the lower classes sing. My face is my fortune, kind sir, she said, was the ditty on which I bestowed most pains, and my father and mother would wink knowingly as I sang it. The latter would also tell me how pretty she was when young, and how she sang, and what a fool she had been, and how well she might have done had she been wise. So there's an implication underlying this as well, right?
Yeah.
What is the mother implying she could have done if she'd been wise? Was it wise to marry father?
No.
And why are mom and dad winking knowingly at each other when she sings about her face being her fortune?
Because they know that that was something that I'm sure she probably had done, or that they know that their daughter is going to be able to do.
Yeah, exactly. That, oh hey, our little Missy here might actually be able to make some money,
Yeah.
right?
Because she's cute.
Yep. And when we think about it too, like, how different is this from the situation of middle-class women on the marriage market?
I mean, it's the only thing that's different, I would say, would be like the end goal. Like, I mean, I guess not necessarily though. I mean, you want to be in like a sturdy, stable relationship, like marriage.
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
it's you're making your money from
Mm-hmm.
prostitution, or making your
Yeah.
just marrying into a good husband, household, family.
Mm-hmm. And does your average middle-class woman actually have much of any education?
No.
No, she's not going to school either.
Yeah.
And if she is going to school, all she's being taught is how to be disinterestedly kind, right?
Right.
Or how to be amusing.
Yeah.
Essentially, she's
learning
being,
like the piano.
yeah, she's being, but yeah, taught how to play the piano competently, right? But not to compose.
Right.
Right.
Right. God forbid.
Yeah, God forbid she actually display any kind of real creative talent. But yeah, and even the Stickney Ellis. Let's just kind of turn back to that for a second. On page 658, right, she says, "Let us single out from any particular seminary a child who has been there from the years of 10 to 15 and reckon, if it can be reckoned, the pains that have been spent in making that child proficient in Latin. Have the same pains been spent in making her disinterestedly kind? And yet what man is there in existence who would not rather his wife should be free from selfishness than be able to read Virgil without the use of a dictionary?" One could say a couple of things about this, right? Like, one, well, why shouldn't boys also be taught to be disinterestedly kind, right?
Right.
Why is this education only appropriate for women? But it also kind of like, she tips her hand here, right, as to who this is being done for, right? It's not being done for the girl, or for her good, right?
For the man, and how he would, what man would not rather have his wife be free from selfishness?
Yeah, exactly.
I can't believe that this was like a serious thing. That like
Yeah.
people just like had to. And it sucks because for the women, like I've like tried like to think about like what I would do in that situation. Granted, like there's so much to consider and like how to think about like
And I think
what the time is like. But like honestly, like
Mhm.
I can't imagine that I would be like okay with just living my life like that, but also like if I was conditioned to grow up in a world
exactly.
where that was, maybe
Yeah.
I think like, oh my gosh, no, like she's bad, she shouldn't be doing that, she's making women look bad. I'm right, but in retrospect, like that's not right at all. It's just that's all they know.
Yeah, and again, like
It's so sad.
exactly what I was going to point out is like you have a lot of advantages
Yeah.
that someone even like Sarah Stickney Ellis probably wouldn't have, right? You've grown up in a culture where it is assumed that women have at least some basic rights, and in which girls are educated alongside boys in public schools. So like. You're learning the same things as your male classmates, right? You can go to university and take a degree, right? You're not operating under the same, and you're not necessarily, because it's expected that you're going to end up working to earn your own keep, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to find a man to take care of you. And this is kind of like where, like one of the reasons I try to get y'all to be a little bit more sympathetic to Bertha when we read The Mortal Immortal, right? Because this is Bertha's basic situation, right?
Yeah.
All she's got is that she's pretty. And so she needs somebody to notice that and take care of her, right? Because she won't survive otherwise. And I think like that's part of like why I think original audiences of that story, who would have been predominantly middle class women, would have identified probably more with Bertha than with Winsey.
Right.
But yeah, similar situation here, right?
Yeah.
The difference here is kind of, it's like in the level of affluence, and that people who have had the advantage of affluence are looking down on people who have not, right? And if we look on page 667 again here, right, where she's like the idea is forming in her mind here of like what she's going to become as an adult here. Frequently we had quite a stir in our colony. Some young lady who had quitted the paternal restraints, or perhaps had started off none knew whither or how, to seek her fortune, would reappear among us with a profusion of ribbons, fine clothes, and lots of cash. Visiting the neighbors, treating indiscriminately, was the order of the day on such occasions, without any more definite information of the means by which the dazzling transformation had been effected than could be conveyed by knowing winks and the words luck and friends. Then she would disappear and leave us in our dirt penury and obscurity. You cannot conceive, sir, how our young ambition was stirred by these visitations. So who are these strangers are these, not strangers, these visitors who are coming to the neighborhood?
I want to say like the men that are like of higher wealth
Oh,
coming into.
These aren't men that are coming back to the neighborhood. These are women coming back to the neighborhood, right? A young lady who had quitted the paternal restraints or perhaps been started off no one knew whither or how to seek her. Yeah, exactly. These are prostitutes coming back to the old neighborhood, and suddenly they're well-dressed, they've got money, right?
Right.
So to her, this actually looks like a pretty attractive proposition, right? Because these are the only wealthy people she ever sees. These are the only people with money she ever encounters. I mean, it's, I think, like the same reason, like why, like a lot of kids today, particularly growing up in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, right? They all want to be pro athletes or hip hop stars or whatever, right? Because they look at who came out of their neighborhood, right? And okay, those are the people who made it, right? Those are the people who made it out. And I think she's thinking a similar thing, right? The people who make it out of my neighborhood are prostitutes.
Right.
So it might be worth noting a couple of things about working class women generally and about Victorian era prostitution, right? So when we talk about like working class women, we're talking about roughly 25% of Britain's female population. Now, this does not mean that 25% of these women were prostitutes. But it does mean that 25% of Britain's female population were born into economically disadvantaged circumstances and worked at low-wage, low-skill jobs with very little power, very little agency. So the expectation generally was that they were going to work both inside and outside the home, right? You can't afford servants, so somebody's got to watch the kids. Somebody's got to make sure that dinner gets on the table. But you're also probably going to have to go work a 12-hour shift at the match factory. So, guess who doesn't get to sleep much? Not only that, but some of these jobs paid so poorly that many, though by no means a majority of working class women, actually supplemented their income with prostitution. So when we look at who a typical Victorian prostitute was, usually she was somebody who actually also had another job. It was just that other job didn't pay her enough. And oftentimes, these were women who weren't married and had kids. So there were, between 1840 and 1890, so we're talking like kind of like the bulk of the Victorian period here, there were known to have been about 30,000 prostitutes in England and Wales. And as I noted a little earlier, the Society for the Suppression of Vice types always treated this as a moral rather than an economic problem. That the problem for them wasn't that these women didn't have enough money to keep body and soul together. The problem was that the poor simply didn't know how to behave themselves. And so, if temptations were removed from the public sphere, anything that tempted the poor to vice, right, then maybe they would be able to, get their loins under control, right? And we can see some of Malthus's reasoning in this as well, right? Now, the Society for the Suppression of Vice people aren't, necessarily expecting that the poor are just going to die off, right? But they are deeply concerned about the moral development of the poor. But they don't want to do anything necessarily to relieve the economic conditions underlying what they see as moral depravity.
Right.
And so, I just want to, and I think, we can probably kind of finish up with this. On page 668, right? I speak for others as well as for myself. For the very great majority, nearly all of the real undisguised prostitutes in London spring from my class and are made by and under pretty much such conditions of life as I have narrated, and particularly by untutored and unrestrained intercourse of the sexes in early life. We come from the dregs of society, as our so-called betters term it. What business has society to have dregs, such dregs as we? You railers of the Society for the Suppression of Vice, you the pious, the moral, the respectable as you call yourselves, who stand on your smooth and pleasant side of the great gulf you have dug, and keep yourself between yourselves and the dregs, why don't you bridge it over or fill it up, and by some humane and generous process, absorb us into your leavened mass, until we become interpenetrated with goodness like yourselves? Why stand on your eminence shouting that we should be ashamed of ourselves? What have we to be ashamed of, we who do not know what shame is, the shame you mean? I conduct myself prudently and defy you and your policemen too. Why stand you there mouthing with sleek face about morality? What is morality? Will you make us responsible for what we never knew? Teach us what is right and tutor us in good before you punish us for doing wrong. We who are the real prostitutes of the true natural growth of society and no impostors will not be judged by one more unfortunate, nor measured by any standard of her setting up. She is a mere chance intruder in our ranks and has no business there. So what do you think of this? What does she seem to be suggesting would be the actual solution to the problem of prostitution?
Instead of just letting them grow up in these horrible conditions and not and having that to be their only option.
Yeah.
Help them before it happens. Give them the means to absorb them into your leavened mass. Make them penetrated with goodness. I think that in a way she's kind of obviously just jabbing at them by saying some of the things she said, but really they do. She has a really good point. Don't start shitting on us just because we didn't have the same opportunity as you guys did.
Yeah, I mean this is her only shot at social mobility, right?
Yeah.
So
and
it's okay,
she's screwed if she doesn't do it, but then she's getting crucified because she is doing it, and there's no, she has to. The same way that the women in the middle class, if they don't do what they have to do, they're gonna be fucked too.
Yeah.
I feel like she's just suggesting maybe instead of just judging us and calling them out for how they feel, how they are telling them how they are. So get off your high horse and help out for once. Do something if you're gonna shit. All over us, fuck shit.
So, if you're interested, I'm not going to require that you read this, of course, it's not on the syllabus. But if this is a topic that interests you, there's a play by George Bernard Shaw It's in this volume of the anthology. It's called Mrs. Warren's Profession. And it deals with the same kinds of issues that we've been talking about here by kind of like by dramatizing them, right? You know, by putting these same ideas into the mouths of characters in a play. So yeah, I would recommend checking this out.
I totally will.
All right, so that is all I have for you. Do you have any questions about anything?
Not necessarily right now.
Okay, well, you know my door's always open if something arises. All right, so I'm going to give you the guide questions for